December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. Battleships lie broken, their hulls split open like gutted leviathans. Their guns silent, their decks smoldering under a canopy of oily black smoke. Japan's admirals look across the Pacific and believe they have bought themselves time-precious months, perhaps even years, before the Americans can strike back with carriers. Their calculation is simple. Aircraft carriers are titanic machines of steel and precision. They require years of construction, thousands of workers, and the finest shipyards. In Tokyo, the Imperial Navy's senior staff nod with grim satisfaction. They have won the breathing space to consolidate their empire. But that confidence will soon be shattered. Only 6 months later, June 1942, at Midway, the impossible unfolds. The Americans are not only back, they are striking with carriers that seem to have materialized from nowhere. Carriers that should have taken years to build are appearing in the Pacific in a relentless stream. It is as if the United States has conjured them from smoke and steel overnight. Japanese officers, poring over intelligence reports, ask the same question again and again. How could this be possible? The story begins in the shipyards. In Newport News, in Brooklyn, in San Francisco, sparks fall like firestorms as welders work without pause. Steel plates clang into place with the rhythm of industrial drums. Rivets hiss under the relentless pound of machines. Day and night blur together under floodlights as tens of thousands of men and women swarm across the skeletal frames of half-formed ships. What once took 5 years is now being done in 18 months. What once seemed unimaginable, to launch fully operational carriers in a matter of months, becoming reality. Picture a Japanese intelligence officer in early 1942, studying intercepted reports from American newspapers and naval communiques. His pencil stops mid-sentence. A new Essex-class carrier, laid down barely 2 years ago, is already preparing for sea trials. Another is sliding down the slipways even as the first begins shakedown cruises. For the Admirals in Tokyo, this defies all naval logic. In their world, a carrier was a crown jewel of the fleet, requiring exquisite craftsmanship and endless patience. Yet the Americans treat them almost like assembly line products, built with a speed that threatens to upend the balance of the Pacific. The fog of war makes the first sightings all the more terrifying. April 1942. The Doolittle raid. 16 B-25 bombers roar off the deck of the USS Hornet. They are crude, short-range attacks, but the symbolism is devastating. The Japanese High Command stares at the reports with disbelief. Not only do the Americans still have functioning carriers, they are pushing them close enough to strike the home islands themselves. The message is unmistakable. America's carrier force has not been crippled. It is alive, growing, and reaching further than expected. Then comes Midway. June 4th, 1942. Dawn breaks over the Pacific. Japanese carrier decks buzz with activity, aircraft warming, crews racing. They believe they hold the initiative. For carriers, Kagi, Soryu, Hiru stand ready to crush what they think is a crippled and hesitant American fleet. But within hours, their pride turns to ash. Dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown plummet from the skies, their bombs ripping through armored decks, igniting aviation fuel, turning entire hangars into infernos. By sunset, 4 Japanese carriers lie at the bottom of the ocean. The sea swallows the backbone of the Imperial Navy. The shock is not just tactically, it's existential. How can a nation thought to be reeling from Pearl Harbor not only fight back, but do so with a force of carriers that should not yet exist? In Tokyo, whispers spread through the corridors of Naval Command. The Americans, it seems, are bending the very rules of shipbuilding. What Japan's admirals believed would take half a decade, the United States is achieving in 2 years or less. Reports filter in from Japanese scouts across the Pacific. New silhouettes appear on the horizon. Carriers they cannot identify. Ships they had not accounted for. And always, behind each one, more coming. It is like facing an enemy that regenerates faster than you can destroy him. Each carrier lost at Midway is a wound that will never heal for Japan because replacements cannot be built fast enough. But for America, every loss is a lesson and, behind it, another ship is already rolling out of the yards. Imagine the growing dread in the war rooms of Tokyo. Maps littered with red pins places where American carriers strike and vanish. Coral Sea, Guadalcanal, the Solomons. Each time, Japanese intelligence estimates the Americans can only field a handful. Yet each time, more appear. By 1943, the reports grow almost surreal. Carriers are being commissioned at a pace of 1 every few months. By 1944, it becomes a flood-in industrial tsunami of steel hulls, flight decks, and squadrons of aircraft. The Japanese Navy, steeped in tradition and mastery of seamanship, is forced to confront a brutal truth. They had built their empire on the assumption that America could not match both quantity and quality at once. But now their admirals sit in council rooms, staring at production figures that defy belief. The Essex class, with its massive 27,000-ton displacement and ability to carry more than 90 aircraft, is appearing not as a rare jewel, but as a common weapon of war. The psychological toll is immense. In after-action reports, Japanese commanders describe facing phantom carriers, ships they did not expect, emerging seemingly out of thin air. In one battle, their pilots are briefed to strike a lone American carrier, only to find two, then three, bearing down upon them. The very scale of American industrial might becomes a weapon in itself, sowing doubt, confusion, and fear for the Japanese sailor on deck. The war shifts from one of daring maneuvers to one of hopeless arithmetic. For every carrier sunk, two more take its place. For every squadron destroyed, replacements arrive in waves. And for the admirals, once so confident in Japan's precision and planning, there is only disbelief. The Americans are not just building carriers. They are building them in months, and in doing so, they are rewriting the fate of the Pacific War. What began as shock at Midway becomes resignation by 1944 at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The largest carrier battle in history, Japan throws its remaining strength into the fight, but against a wall of Essex-class carriers and light carriers. Their pilots are slaughtered in what will be called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The carriers they once believed would dominate the Pacific now lie smoldering wrecks, while America's assembly lines promise yet more to come. And so, the war shifts irreversibly. Japan's admirals, men who once studied Mahon and dreamed of decisive battle, are left grappling with a nightmare, a war of machines and factories they cannot hope to win. For every calculation they made, they overlooked one truth: the United States had turned its entire nation into a shipyard, and in doing so, it had transformed the very meaning of naval warfare. The Pacific is on fire. Japan's empire stretches like a steel claw across Asia, from the jungles of Burma to the coral atolls of the Marshall Islands. Their navy, the most feared striking force in the world, sails with the confidence of men who believe they have already won. 4 years earlier, they had shocked the world at Tsushima Strait's anniversary celebrations, revealing gleaming aircraft carriers like Akagi and Kaga symbols of a modern, unstoppable fleet. They have crushed China's coasts, struck Pearl Harbor with devastating precision, and shattered Allied defenses in Malaya, Singapore, and the Philippines. The rising sun flies over territories thought unassailable, but the Pacific is a vast ocean, more than 60 million square miles, and controlling it demands more than daring raids and lightning advances. It demands logistics, shipyards, and an endless ability to replace losses. And here lies the fault line between two visions of war. The Japanese Empire is built on exquisite craftsmanship and elite warriors. Their Zero fighters, light and lethal, seem untouchable in the early months. Their naval officers are trained to perfection, men of samurai lineage who view battle as both art and destiny. But behind the myth lies a fragile industrial core. Japan can build ships, but not in endless numbers. They can train pilots, but not faster than war consumes them. Their shipyards are small, their resources limited, their doctrine fixed on the idea of a single, decisive clash. Across the ocean, America plays a different game. The United States Navy in 1941 is smaller, less experienced, and, at Pearl Harbor, seemingly broken. Yet the foundations of something colossal are already in place. The Naval Expansion Act of 1938, followed by Roosevelt's Two-Ocean Navy Act of 1940, has poured billions into shipbuilding. Long before the bombs fell on Hawaii, steel was being ordered, shipways widened, and factories converted to naval production. What the Japanese do not yet realize is that they have struck an enemy preparing for industrial war on a scale the world has never seen. By 1942, American shipyards are not workshops. They are cities. At Brooklyn Navy Yard, cranes taller than cathedrals swing steel plates into place with hypnotic precision. In Newport News, sparks cascade like molten waterfalls as entire sections of hulls are welded together in days. At Four Rivers Shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts, women in coveralls rivet flight decks with the speed of factory machines. For the first time in history, carriers are being built not as singular masterpieces, but as products of an assembly line. The Essex class is the embodiment of this new philosophy. Conceived before Pearl Harbor, but accelerated after it, it is designed not just for power, but for production. Standardized blueprints allow shipyards across the nation to build simultaneously. Modular construction, prefabricated parts shipped in by rail means, sections of a carrier can be built in parallel, then fused together like pieces of a colossal puzzle, where Japan pours 5 years into one ship. America launches several in the same span. Japanese intelligence struggles to grasp this reality. Reports from spies in San Francisco and Norfolk filter back to Tokyo, but the numbers seem impossible. They hear whispers of dozens of keels laid down at once, of flight decks stretching into the horizon, of workers numbering not in the thousands, but in the hundreds of thousands. The Imperial General Staff dismisses some of these reports as exaggeration. After all, how could any nation bend time itself, forging warships at such a pace? Yet the evidence will become undeniable. The doctrine mismatch is stark. Japanese naval thought is rooted in the lessons of Tsushima, the great fleet battle where Admiral Togo destroyed the Russian Navy with one decisive stroke. Their strategy for the Pacific War mirrors that vision: lure the American fleet across the ocean, bleed it with submarines and aircraft, then annihilate it in a climactic clash somewhere near the home islands. This is the essence of Kantai Kasen, the decisive battle doctrine. But Kantai Kasen assumes time is on Japan's side, that the Americans will need years to rebuild before such a clash can occur. The United States, however, does not wait. Instead of preparing for one grand showdown, they unleash a war of attrition, knowing they can replace what is lost faster than Japan can even imagine. The doctrine is not elegant, not romantic, but it is ruthless and effective. Every month that passes, the balance tilts. Every new Essex that slides into the sea is another nail in the coffin of Kantai-Kessen. In 1942, this reality is not yet clear. The Battle of the Coral Sea in May and Midway in June prove that carriers, not battleships, now dominate the seas. But the Japanese still believe they can outfight, outmaneuver, and outthink their opponents. Their pilots are superior, their tactics sharper, their morale higher. What they cannot yet see is that the ocean itself is turning against them. For behind every American carrier lies an industrial leviathan awakening. Consider the scale. By the end of 1942, Japan has lost 4 fleet carriers at Midway and struggles to replace even one. Meanwhile, American shipyards have already launched Hornet, Enterprise, Yorktown, and Lexington before the war, and Essex herself joins the fleet by December. Behind her are more Bunker Hill, Intrepid, Franklin, Ticonderoga, unbroken line of steel giants stretching into the future. For the Japanese admirals, the war still feels winnable. Victories in the Solomons, the brutal battles around Guadalcanal give them moments of hope. But the shadow of American industry is lengthening. Every aircraft shot down, every carrier damaged, every pilot lost tightens the noose. The Americans are not fighting the war Japan planned for. They are fighting a war of numbers, and numbers are what America commands. By late 1942, the first tremors of realization ripple through Tokyo, intercepted. Communications and after-action reports confirm what once seemed impossible. The Americans are commissioning carriers in less than 2 years, sometimes closer to 1. At naval conferences, senior officers murmur in disbelief. Some cling to the hope that Japan's skill and spirit can compensate for industrial disparity. Others, more pragmatic, begin to fear that the war they launched is already unwinnable. By 1943, the truth is undeniable. America's hidden advantage has become the war's defining factor. Each carrier lost at Midway is replaced, multiplied, improved. The Essex class, with its long flight deck and cavernous hangars, becomes a symbol not of one nation's navy, but of an entire civilization mobilized for total war. Japan's admirals, once masters of the Pacific, now watch helplessly as the ocean fills with American steel. And yet, for the men in the cockpits and on the decks, this advantage is not abstract. It is the difference between victory and annihilation. For the Marine on Guadalcanal, hearing the drone of dauntless dive bombers above, it is salvation. For the Japanese sailor watching American planes swarm his carrier, it is despair. And for the admirals in Tokyo, staring at maps where red arrows once surged forward, it is a revelation as bitter as it is final. They cannot outbuild America. The hidden advantage is no longer hidden. It is here. It is unstoppable. And it will decide the fate of the Pacific. September 1943. The port of Norfolk, Virginia. Dawn breaks over the shipyard, and the sound is not of gulls or waves, but of hammers, welding torches, and the thunder of cranes. The skeleton of a new carrier rises from the slipway, its steel ribs silhouetted against the rising sun like the bones of some great leviathan. Men and women pour into the yard in shifts so relentless that the day never truly ends. Sparks fly in showers as seams are welded, sections lowered into place. On the horizon, trains arrive daily, disgorging prefabricated modules, boilers, sections of flight deck, massive gun turrets, all built in factories hundreds of miles inland. This is not shipbuilding as the Japanese know it. This is engineering transformed into industry, and industry transformed into war. The Essex-class carrier is the centerpiece of this revolution, displacing 27,100 tons, stretching 872 feet from bow to stern. She is vast enough to host 90 aircraft on her decks and hangars, yet lean enough to slice through the Pacific at 33 knots. At her heart, 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers feed, 4 Westinghouse turbines, unleashing 150,000 horsepower into 4 great propeller shafts. She is both fortress and airfield, a mobile city of steel carrying 2,600 men. But the marvel lies not only in her specifications, lies in how quickly she can be made. The Japanese Navy regards each carrier as a singular masterpiece, requiring exquisite craftsmanship and years of construction. The Americans have taken the opposite approach. They treat the Essex as a blueprint, a design to be replicated, improved, and multiplied with ruthless efficiency. Prefabrication is the key. Where Japan builds, sequentially laying keel, then hull, then decks, the United States builds in parallel. Entire sections are constructed simultaneously in different factories, then rushed to coastal yards by rail. A bow forged in Pittsburgh meets a stern shaped in Philadelphia, and within weeks the two are welded into a whole. What once took years now takes months. The technical marvel extends beyond the ship's frame. The Essex carries the new generation of American aircraft 6F Hellcats, rugged and deadly. Built to survive hits that would shatter the fragile Zero. She launches TBF Avengers, torpedo bombers with folding wings designed specifically for carrier operations. The deck elevators, massive steel platforms, can lift 15,000-pound planes from hangar to flight deck in less than 15 seconds. Catapults hurl them into the sky with a thunderclap. Arrestor wires snare them on return, cables screaming as they absorb the shock of landing. The flight deck itself is armored with teak over steel, capable of absorbing the impact of bombs and still holding together to the Japanese. Accustomed to smaller air wings and more delicate flight operations, the Essex seems impossible. Their carriers, Kagi, Kaga, Shaga, powerful, yes, but fragile. Each one is an irreplaceable treasure. The Americans, by contrast, treat the Essex as a weapon to be produced in series, like rifles or tanks. Inside the shipyards, efficiency is measured in man-hours and tonnage. One Essex requires roughly 2.5 million man-hours of labor. Yet, with assembly line techniques and mass mobilization, the United States Navy can deliver one every few months. The Brooklyn Navy Yard alone, once a peacetime symbol of naval tradition, becomes a colossus of production, employing 70,000 workers at its wartime peak. Newport News shipbuilding matches the pace, its docks ablaze with floodlights that turn night into day. And beyond these yards, the entire American industrial web hums in unison. The Ford Motor Company, once famous for Model Ts, now churns out Pratt and Whitney engines. General Motors builds aircraft components by the tens of thousands. Railroads haul steel plate nonstop, their schedules bent entirely toward war. Even universities are harnessed, engineers designing new welding techniques that replace rivets with stronger, faster seams. America is not merely building ships, it's reinventing the process of creation itself. In Tokyo, the Imperial Navy's Intelligence Bureau begins compiling reports. By late 1943, they estimate that the United States will soon be launching carriers faster than Japan can sink them. The numbers are surreal. By the end of the war, 24 Essex-class carriers will be in service, joined by 9 Independence-class light carriers and more than 100 escort carriers. The scale is beyond comprehension. Japan, with limited steel, limited oil, and shipyards already strained, cannot hope to match it. The specifications sting all the more because they are not just numbers, they translate into battlefield dominance. Each Essex can put nearly 100 aircraft into the air, often double the capacity of a Japanese carrier. Each carries radar systems, the SK and SC-2, that sweep the skies for hundreds of miles, giving warning of incoming raids before Japanese scouts even sight them. Their anti-aircraft batteries bristle with 5-inch, 38 dual-purpose guns, Bofors 40mm cannons, and Oerlikon 20mm guns, forming walls of fire that turn the sky into a death trap. 4. attacking pilots. The Japanese understand quality. They have built the finest naval aviators in the world. Men whose skill at the war's outset seemed unmatched. But they cannot counter the industrial alchemy of the Essex class. It is not just one carrier. It is a fleet of fleets, a system of systems, a manifestation of the United States industrial soul. For the engineers and shipwrights, the pace is grueling. They work double shifts, 6 and 7 days a week. But morale is high, fueled by the urgency of war and the knowledge that every bolt they tighten, every seam they weld, brings another floating fortress into being. Launch ceremonies become a regular spectacle. Brass bands play, flags wave, families cheer as another Leviathan slides into the sea, christened by the swing of a champagne bottle. And always there is another hull behind it, waiting to be finished, waiting to join the war. Japanese officers, upon reading captured intelligence after Midway and Guadalcanal, describe the American shipbuilding effort as unnatural. One even writes, "It is as if the Americans have turned the land itself into a shipyard." In truth, that is exactly what has happened. Every city, every factory, every train yard is linked in a vast chain, feeding the front lines with steel and firepower. By 1944, the Essex class dominates the seas. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, 15 of them steamed together, their decks swarming with more than 900 aircraft. Against them, the Japanese muster 9 carriers, many of them filled with inexperienced pilots. The result is slaughter. American gunners and pilots tear through the waves of Japanese attackers, downing hundreds of aircraft in a single day. The Japanese call it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot for the Americans. It is proof that their system works, that the carrier, mass-produced and endlessly supplied, has become the ultimate weapon of war. Spring 1945. The waters off Okinawa boil with fire and steel. Waves of kamikaze aircraft dive out of the sky like flaming meteors, their engines screaming, their pilots determined to trade their lives for American ships. Explosions ripple across the horizon as destroyers twist and dodge anti-aircraft guns, hammering ceaselessly. Smoke rises in towering columns, and the sea itself seems to burn. Yet, through it all, the Essex-class carriers endure. Their decks shudder under impact, their crews race to douse flames, but within hours, planes are flying again. No matter how fierce the assault, the floating airfields survive. For the Japanese, Okinawa is a final gamble. Their strategy is no longer to win the war, but to bleed America so heavily that it hesitates to invade the home islands. The kamikaze is their last weapon, born from desperation and fueled by sacrifice. And in the early days of the battle, it seems to work. The USS Bunker Hill, struck by 2 suicide planes in quick succession, erupts in flames that kill nearly 400 sailors. The USS Franklin, bombed while launching aircraft, suffers catastrophic damage, more than 700 men killed. Yet even as these ships burn, the truth becomes undeniable. America can afford these losses. The carriers are repaired, recommissioned, replaced. For every ship crippled, another Essex is already steaming west across the Pacific. The psychological gulf widens. Japanese commanders, watching their bravest pilots vanish in fire, know they cannot match this scale. Each kamikaze consumes fuel, planes, and precious lives that cannot be replenished. Each Essex that goes down is replaced by another. In Tokyo's naval war rooms, the reports grow increasingly grim. American carriers seem to regenerate faster than they can be destroyed, their flight decks multiplying across the Pacific like a fleet of shadows. Strategically, the carriers do more than absorb punishment, they dictate the pace of war. At Iwo Jima, at Okinawa, they provide constant, crushing air support. American Marines advance under skies cleared by Hellcats, their positions shielded by Avengers dropping bombs with relentless precision. Radar-guided combat air patrols ensure Japanese raids are intercepted before they reach the beaches. For the Japanese defenders, cut off and isolated, every sortie feels futile, every defense temporary. The carriers make resistance seem like drowning in a rising tide. But the impact is not just military, it is psychological. American sailors speak of their carriers as lifelines, their confidence rooted in the knowledge that the skies above will always belong to them. Pilots land battered planes on decks, scarred by fire, greeted by crews who repair both machine and spirit. There is a sense of connection, of resilience, as if the carriers themselves embody the nation's will. For the Japanese, the opposite is true. Carriers are no longer symbols of dominance. They are symbols of loss. Each one sunk is irreplaceable. Each pilot killed a wound that never heals. The Imperial Navy, once the pride of the empire, dwindles into silence by mid-1945. Japan's surviving admirals speak not of victory, but of inevitability. Their fleets are gone, their carriers at the bottom of the sea, their pilots consumed in suicidal attacks that barely dent America's advance. They had once believed the decisive battle doctrine would save them, that skill and courage could balance against numbers. But the war has proven otherwise. Numbers are not abstract. They are steel planes. Bombs end. They crush even the bravest spirit when multiplied without end. The Essex class becomes more than a weapon. It becomes a symbol of psychological warfare. Japanese civilians, hearing of the floating airfields that appear off island after island, begin to sense the hopelessness of resistance. Soldiers on the ground, watching their skies darken with American aircraft, feel the crushing inevitability of defeat. Even kamikaze pilots, writing farewell letters before their final missions, confess doubts. What good is one life, one plane, against a fleet that never stops growing? American commanders understand this psychological weight. They deploy the carriers not just as military tools, but as symbols of dominance. Task Force 58, composed almost entirely of Essex-class carriers, roams the Pacific like a storm, striking wherever it pleases. The Japanese never know where the blow will fall next. Guam, today; Formosa, tomorrow; Tokyo, itself, the day after. The unpredictability, combined with the sheer scale, leaves Japanese strategy paralyzed, and still, the carriers are not alone. Behind them lies a logistical chain so vast it defies imagination. Oilers refuel them at sea. Ammunition ships deliver endless bombs. Hospital ships wait to receive the wounded. Repair ships patch battle damage in days, not weeks. America has not only built carriers, it has built the world's first truly mobile war machine. An armada sustained by its own floating infrastructure for the Japanese admirals. The war has turned into a nightmare of arithmetic. Their empire shrinks, their navy evaporates, their pilots vanish. The Americans lose ships and men, but their numbers never fall. Every report from the front carries the same grim refrain: more carriers, more planes, more bombs. By the summer of 1945, Japan's fleet exists only in memory. While the horizon bristles with American decks, the psychological toll reaches its climax as American carriers unleash direct raids on the home islands. In March, hundreds of aircraft take off from Essex decks to bomb Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya. Factories burn, cities smolder, and for the first time, civilians look to the skies and see not the rising sun, but the dark silhouettes of American warplanes descending from carriers offshore. The empire itself, once thought invulnerable, is exposed. And then comes the unthinkable. August 1945. The mushroom clouds over Hiroshima and Nagasaki signal the end. Yet, even before the atomic bomb, the Japanese High Command had already begun to confront the inevitable. Carriers, more than bombs, more than battleships, had broken their will. The Essex class had shown them that war was no longer about singular moments of brilliance or decisive battles between equals. It was about who could build, replace, and endure. America could. Japan could not. When the surrender is signed aboard the USS Missouri in September, Essex-class carriers lie nearby, their decks lined with sailors, their aircraft poised, silent, waiting, their very presence a reminder of what had made victory possible. They are the floating proof of industrial war's new reality, that connection, production, and relentlessness matter more than any individual act of courage. For Japan, the psychological scars linger. The admirals who once dreamed of ruling the Pacific are left with only memories of flames and sinking decks. For America, the carriers stand as monuments to a lesson learned in blood and steel. In the modern age, speed, industry, and coordination crush even the fiercest opponent. September 2nd, 1945. Tokyo Bay lies still beneath a pale morning sky. Allied warships form a silent wall of steel, their decks bristling with sailors standing at attention. At the center, the battleship USS Missouri awaits, her great guns pointed outward like silent guardians. On her deck, Japanese envoys step forward to sign the surrender that will end the most destructive war in history. But looming nearby, less visible yet more powerful, are the ships that truly sealed Japan's fate. Essex-class carriers, their flight decks empty of warplanes for this day of peace, stand as monuments to the industrial force that crushed the empire of the rising sun. The war had begun with Japan's carriers striking Pearl Harbor in fire and smoke, a bold gamble that shocked the world. It ended with America's carriers casting a shadow so vast that even the most hardened Japanese admirals could no longer deny the truth. Battleships had not won the Pacific. Carriers had. And among carriers, none had defined the war more than the Essex class. Their legacy is measured not only in steel and statistics, but in the transformation of warfare itself. Before 1941, the aircraft carrier was an experiment, a supplement to the battleship. By 1945, it was the centerpiece of modern navies. The Essex class proved that wars in the industrial age are not won by individual brilliance or isolated victories, but by systems of production, systems of repair, systems of coordination that overwhelm by sheer persistence. Consider the numbers. 24 Essex-class fleet carriers completed during the war, joined by 9 Independence-class light carriers and over 100 escort carriers. Together, they launched more than 17,000 aircraft sorties during the Battle of Okinawa alone. Their planes sank battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, flattened airfields, and brought the war to Japan's very doorstep. Where Japan lost 4 carriers at Midway and never recovered, America lost carriers and replaced them within months. For every one Japan built, America built 5. The lesson was not lost on the world. In the ashes of the Pacific, military strategists from London to Moscow studied the American model. The Soviet Union, rebuilding its shattered fleets, recognized the importance of carriers, but lacked the industrial base to match them. Britain, exhausted by 6 years of war, admired but could not replicate the American pace. Only the United States emerged from the war with the infrastructure and will to maintain the carrier as the heart of its global power. The Cold War that followed made this legacy clear. Essex-class carriers, modernized with angled decks and jet-capable systems, served for decades after 1945. They patrolled the waters off Korea, launching missions during the Korean War. They cruised through the tense waters of the Cuban Missile Crisis. They provided air cover during Vietnam, their decks now roaring with jet engines instead of propellers. The ships that had once humbled Japan became the very foundation of America's projection of power in a nuclear age. For Japan's surviving admirals, the legacy was bitter. In post-war interrogations, they admitted what they had once refused to believe, that America's industrial might had turned the tide. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, had warned his colleagues before the war, "In the first 6 months, I will run wild, but I cannot guarantee success beyond that." His words proved prophetic. Japan's early victories could not be sustained against an enemy that could build carriers in months, planes in weeks, and train crews faster than they could be killed. The Essex class also reshaped psychology. For the American sailor, they were more than steel decks. They were symbols of connection, of belonging to something larger than themselves. Pilots who landed on their decks knew that even if they fell, replacements would rise to continue the fight. For the Japanese, they became symbols of despair. No matter how many carriers they struck, more would come. No matter how many planes they downed, new squadrons appeared. The Essex class embodied inevitability, and inevitability breaks morale as surely as bombs break steel. The legacy extends beyond navies and beyond generations. In the Gulf War of 1991, American carriers projected power with a precision unimaginable in 1945. Yet their DNA traced back to the Essex class. In today's network-centric warfare, where satellites, drones, and data links dominate, the principle remains the same. Coordination outweighs individual firepower. Speed defeats armor. Connection triumphs over isolation. The Essex class was the blueprint for modern war, not because it was perfect, but because it was reproducible, adaptable, and inexhaustible. The human cost is not forgotten. Thousands of sailors lived and died on those decks, fighting battles that scarred the Pacific forever. Japanese sailors and pilots, men of courage and discipline, faced them with equal determination, but they were crushed beneath the weight of an enemy they could not match. The Essex class reminds us that victory is not only about courage, it is about sustaining courage with resources, strategy, and unyielding supply. As the sun set on 1945, the world entered a new era. Japan lay in ruins, its empire gone, its navy shattered. America, with its Essex-class carriers, stood astride the Pacific as the new naval hegemon. The ships themselves, once symbols of wartime urgency, became the foundation of peacetime power. Some would be scrapped, others modernized, but their impact would never fade. They had rewritten naval doctrine, reshaped global strategy, and proven that in modern war, the factory is as decisive as the battlefield. Standing on the deck of a carrier in 1945, one could look across the horizon and see not just ships, but the future. Rows of flight decks, bristling with planes, stretching into the distance like a promise. A promise that the United States would never again be caught unprepared. Never again underestimate the value of speed and industry. And so, the final lesson echoes across history. Japan built ships of elegance and power, but too few, too slow, too fragile. America built ships of endurance and repetition, fast enough to overwhelm, strong enough to survive. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel of Germany would later admit it in his own way. We built better tanks, but you built tanks that worked together. The same could be said of carriers. Japan built ships of brilliance. America built carriers that worked together, endlessly, tirelessly, until the ocean itself bent to their will. In the end, the Essex class was not just a class of warships. It was the embodiment of a nation's ability to transform tragedy into triumph, loss into relentless momentum. It was the thunder of industry made flesh, the will of millions forged into steel and set adrift on the seas. And it left behind a lesson as eternal as the ocean itself in modern war. Connection outweighs firepower, and speed defeats armor.